July 10th marks the 43rd year since Ken McElroy was shot in the infamous...
I'll help you create a compelling YouTube script about an unsolved murder case. Let me search for a well-documented case that had a significant impact on a community. Great! I found an excellent case for the script. The murder of Ken McElroy in Skidmore, Missouri. Let me gather more details about this case. Perfect. I now have comprehensive information about the Ken McElroy case. Let me create an engaging YouTube script based on this fascinating true crime story. Imagine a town so terrified of one man that when he was gunned down in broad daylight,
on his crime spree. KQ2's Noel Harden has more on McElroy.
Surrounded by dozens of witnesses, not a single person saw anything. Picture a community so desperate for justice that they chose silence over truth, protecting a killer rather than condemning them. This isn't fiction. This is the story of Skidmore, Missouri, a tiny farming community of 440 souls that became the stage for one of America's most shocking unsolved murders. On July 10, 1981, the town bully was executed on Main Street. 45 people watched it happen. And 44 years later, no one has ever been charged. What kind of monster could drive an entire town to such desperate measures? What secrets still haunt the streets of Skidmore? And why does this case continue to captivate the world decades later? Ken Rex McElroy wasn't born a monster, but he became one long before his violent end. Born in 1934, he was the 15th of 16 children in a family of poor migrant farmers who eventually settled outside Skidmore in northwest Missouri. By the time he dropped out of school in 8th grade at age 15, unable to read or write, McElroy had already decided that honest work wasn't for him. The fertile farmland surrounding Skidmore became his hunting ground, and for the next 3 decades, he would terrorize every family in the area. McElroy started small, stealing livestock under cover of darkness. Hogs would vanish from pens overnight, cattle would disappear from pastures, and farmers would wake to find their animals gone and McElroy's truck tracks in the mud. But theft was just the beginning. As McElroy grew bolder, his crimes escalated into a reign of terror that would grip the town for over 20 years. He was accused of arson, assault, rape, and child molestation. He intimidated witnesses by parking his truck outside their homes for hours, staring at their windows. He threatened families with violence if they dared to testify against him. One farmer who caught McElroy stealing horses filed charges, but withdrew them after McElroy smashed him across the face with a rifle. The most disturbing aspect of McElroy's story was how completely he manipulated the justice system. He was indicted 21 times on various charges, but escaped conviction every single time except his last. How did he do it? Through a combination of witness intimidation, a skilled defense attorney, and pure menace. Witnesses would mysteriously change their stories or refuse to appear in court. Those brave enough to testify found McElroy's truck idling outside their homes at night. Police officers who confronted him felt genuine fear for their lives. One patrolman who pulled McElroy over for speeding later recalled, standing with his service weapon drawn, certain that the man with Elvis-like slicked back hair and piercing, mean eyes might try to kill him. Days later, a pickup truck appeared outside that officer's remote country house in the middle of the night, just sitting there in the darkness. McElroy's personal life was equally disturbing. He married multiple women, often while still married to others. In one horrifying case, he met a 12-year-old girl named Trina at a local dance. He quickly began a sexual relationship with the child, impregnating her when she was just 14. When Trina's parents tried to intervene, McElroy burned their house down. He was eventually indicted for arson, assault, and statutory rape, but even then, the system failed. After Trina and her baby were placed in foster care, McElroy sat outside the foster home for hours, staring. He told the foster parents he would trade their biological daughter for Trina's baby since he knew which school bus she rode. Terrified, they returned the child to McElroy. Trina would become his wife and remain with him until the day he died. By 1980, Skidmore had endured 2 decades of McElroy's violence with no relief from law enforcement or the courts. Then came the incident that would seal his fate. One of McElroy's children got into a dispute at a local grocery store owned by 70-year-old Ernest Bowenkamp and his wife Lois. The disagreement allegedly involved a piece of stolen candy. McElroy began stalking the Bowenkamps, eventually confronting Ernest in the back of his store with a shotgun. In the loading dock, while the elderly grocer was cutting up boxes, McElroy shot him in the neck. Miraculously, Bowenkamp survived. For once, justice seemed possible. McElroy was arrested and charged with first-degree assault, which carried a potential life sentence. In June 1981, he was convicted of second-degree assault and sentenced to 2 years. The town breathed a collective sigh of relief. Their tormentor would finally be removed. But their relief lasted only hours. A judge released McElroy on a $40,000 bond pending his appeal. The nightmare wasn't over. It was about to reach its climax. McElroy immediately went to the D&G Tavern, a local bar on Main Street. He carried with him an M1 Garand rifle with a bayonet attached, and he made graphic, terrifying threats about what he would do to Bo Bowenkamp when he got the chance. This blatant violation of his bond conditions should have landed him back in jail, but through his lawyer's maneuvering, the hearing was delayed again and again. The legal system had failed Skidmore one more time. On the morning of July 10, 1981, tensions in Skidmore reached a breaking point. Frustrated townspeople gathered at the American Legion Hall to meet with Nodaway County Sheriff Dan Estes. They wanted to know how they could protect themselves from a violent criminal the courts refused to contain. The sheriff suggested they form a neighborhood watch and specifically told them not to confront McElroy directly. Then he left town. Around 10:30 that morning, word spread that McElroy and Trina were at the D&G Tavern. The group of men from the Legion Hall made a decision. They walked down Main Street to the bar. The tavern quickly filled with angry, frightened citizens who had suffered under McElroy's reign for far too long. McElroy sat at the bar drinking, fully aware of the hostile crowd around him, but characteristically unbothered. He purchased a 6-pack of beer and walked outside to his Chevy Silverado pickup truck, Trina following behind him. What happened next would become one of the most infamous moments in American true crime history. McElroy climbed into the driver's seat of his truck. Trina sat beside him. Somewhere between 30 and 46 townspeople surrounded the vehicle. Then, in broad daylight on the main street of a small American town, shots rang out. McElroy was struck at least twice, once by a centerfire rifle round and once by a .22 rimfire bullet, indicating at least 2 different shooters. The bullets tore through his head and neck. Trina, sitting inches away, was not hit. She scrambled from the truck screaming, covered in her husband's blood. Nobody called for an ambulance. As McElroy slumped dead in his truck, witnesses began to scatter. When law enforcement arrived at the scene, they found a crime scene unlike any they'd encountered. 45 people had been present when Ken McElroy was executed. Not one of them could identify who pulled the trigger. Most claimed they hadn't seen anything at all. Some said they were looking the other way. Others said they had just stepped away at the critical moment. It was as if an entire town had gone simultaneously blind. The investigation was immediate and intense. Local authorities launched a coroner's inquest and convened a grand jury. The FBI stepped in 8 days after the killing, conducting extensive interviews and forensic analysis. Trina McElroy named one man as a possible gunman. But her testimony alone wasn't enough. 3 separate grand juries heard evidence. Federal investigators pursued leads across state lines. Yet despite the overwhelming number of witnesses and the public nature of the crime, no one was ever arrested. No one was ever charged. The case officially remains unsolved to this day. The silence of Skidmore became legendary. Journalists from Chicago, New York, and beyond descended on the town, seeking answers. 60 Minutes, Rolling Stone, Playboy, and countless other media outlets covered the story. The FBI investigation file grew thick with interviews that led nowhere. Still, the townspeople held firm to their collective amnesia. They had reached a breaking point where protecting their own, even a vigilante killer, seemed more just than relying on a legal system that had failed them repeatedly. In 1983, Trina McElroy filed a $5 million wrongful death lawsuit against the town of Skidmore, Nodaway County, the sheriff, the mayor, and the man she accused of being the shooter. The case was eventually settled out of court for an undisclosed amount. Trina, who had been victimized by McElroy since she was a child, remarried and moved to Lebanon, Missouri. She died of cancer in 2012 on her 55th birthday. With her death, one of the last key witnesses to that July morning passed away, taking whatever she truly knew to her grave. The story inspired Harry MacLean's Edgar Award-winning book, In Broad Daylight, which became a New York Times bestseller and was adapted into a television movie starring Brian Dennehy in 1991. In 2019, Sundance TV produced a documentary series titled No One Saw a Thing, exploring the decades-old mystery. True crime podcasts, YouTube channels, and television specials continue to examine the case, each trying to answer the unanswerable question: who killed Ken McElroy? As of today, many of the key figures in this story have died. McElroy's defense attorney, the grocer Bo Bowenkamp, and numerous witnesses have all passed away. Nodaway County Sheriff Randy Strong, who was a young officer when the murder occurred and helped process the crime scene, has stated that the two main suspects identified in the investigation are now deceased.